On July 7th, 2010, Theresa Riggi loaded her 3 children into the car and drove south from Aberdeen to Edinburgh. She was 46, a violinist and music teacher who had grown up in Bakersfield, California. Her husband, Pasquale, also 46, worked as a petroleum engineer for Shell Oil. He came from Colorado. The 2 of them had married back in 1989 in a Catholic ceremony in Bakersfield, and later moved to the United Kingdom in 1997 when Pasquale's job took them there. They had 3 children together, 8-year-old twins Austin and Gianluca, who everyone called Luke, and their 5-year-old daughter Cecilia. The children had all been born through IVF after years of failed attempts to conceive naturally. The twins were born in December 2001, and Cecilia followed a few years later in August 2004. But their marriage had collapsed. The couple separated in 2006, and over the next 4 years, their fights over custody grew bitter. Theresa kept the children at home in Skene, Aberdeenshire, where she homeschooled them and managed every part of their lives. When they went outside, they wore electronic locators that she watched constantly. She gave them mobile phones programmed with only her number and told them to use those phones if their father ever said or did something they didn't like. A psychologist who later examined the family said the children had been conditioned to fear both their father and the world beyond their home. They were rarely out of their mother's sight. By 2009, Pasquale hadn't been allowed to see the children at all. The court battles kept getting worse, and by the summer of 2010, he had reached his limit. Theresa knew he was about to push for something more decisive, and she felt the court was beginning to side with him. On July 7th, she decided to act. Without telling Pasquale, she took Austin, Luke, and Cecilia and left Aberdeen. She drove to Edinburgh and settled into a flat on Slateford Road. The property belonged to Andrew Bain, a man she had met through a dating website called Urban Social. Bain agreed to rent the townhouse to her, saying he wanted to help a friend who was struggling. A few days later, on July 12th, the children were supposed to meet their father. Theresa didn't show up. She didn't call or answer any messages. Pasquale tried to reach her over and over, but there was no response. Eventually, he went to Grampian police and reported her and the children missing. It took 9 days for the police to track them down. On July 21st, officers from the Lothian and Borders Police traced Theresa and the children to the Edinburgh flat. They went there 3 times as part of the missing persons investigation. During one of those visits, a messenger at arms arrived carrying a legal order from the Court of Session in Edinburgh. The order required Theresa to hand over all 3 children's passports immediately to make sure she couldn't take them out of the country. Cecilia was standing there when it happened. She watched her mother hand the passports to the officer and asked softly when she would get hers back. Theresa turned to her and said, "You'll not get them back until Mummy's dead." The police left after that. They had confirmed the family was safe and saw no reason to remove the children. But inside that apartment, Theresa's thoughts were coming apart. She was convinced Pasquale was replacing her with his new girlfriend, Michelle Ross, who the children had recently met and been introduced to as Daddy's friend. She believed that meant her chances in court were finished and that the system would soon take the children from her. Pasquale filed for full custody, and a court hearing was set for August 3rd. Theresa understood that time was running out for her, and with every passing day, her control over her children, the one thing she couldn't let go of, was slipping away. Late on the night of August 2nd, sometime around 11:30, Theresa called Pasquale from the flat on Slateford Road while her 3 children slept in the next room. Her voice was harsh and filled with accusation as she told him he was working with the solicitors against her. Over and over, she pressed him, asking if he was going to take the children away. Pasquale had answered this question many times before across the 4 years since their separation, and he was weary of repeating himself. He told her quietly that she had left him no choice. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Theresa said, "Say goodbye then," before hanging up the phone. Pasquale sat there unsure what to make of that final sentence. He had heard so many threats from her before, so many attempts to shake him or control the situation, that this one didn't stand out as any different. It didn't sound dramatic enough to alarm him more than usual, and he went to bed, not realizing what was about to follow. The next morning, August 3rd, Theresa was expected at the Court of Session in Edinburgh for the custody hearing. Pasquale arrived with his solicitor and waited in the courtroom, but Theresa never appeared. As time passed, the judge, Lady Clark, became concerned. Once again, nobody knew where Theresa or the children were. Their safety could no longer be assumed. Pasquale's solicitor, David Jack, asked the court to take immediate steps to protect the children, telling Lady Clark, "I think there is a real emergency in this matter." Lady Clark agreed. She authorized a search warrant for Theresa and directed that social workers go straight to the Slateford Road flat to check on the children. They were to supervise them and decide whether the children should be placed in care for their own safety. If necessary, child protection orders were to be requested right away. The orders were urgent, but the system failed to move quickly. The message did not reach the social work department until 24 hours later. Because of communication delays, no one from social services would arrive at the address until the next day, August 4th. Theresa didn't yet know about the social workers, but she understood what the court's decision meant. She knew Pasquale had gained ground and that the legal system was finally taking his side. Inside the flat, she spent the day with Austin, Luke, and Cecilia, as she always did, homeschooling them, keeping them close, and never letting them out of her sight. The children had no idea their mother had missed a court hearing. They didn't know their father was trying to rescue them, or that strangers would soon knock at the door to take them into care. Theresa looked at her children and made up her mind. If she could not keep them, then no one else would, not Pasquale, not the courts, not social services. In her mind, she was still protecting them. She believed she was their only safety, the only constant in a world that wanted to separate them. And if that world wouldn't let her have them, then she would make sure they went somewhere it couldn't reach. In that small Edinburgh flat, she started preparing for what she thought had to happen next. At some point during the day on August 4th, Theresa walked into the kitchen of the Slateford Road flat and quietly chose 3 knives. She didn't grab them at random. She picked different ones, one for each of her children, as if that detail mattered to her in a way no one else could ever understand. Then she sat down at her laptop and opened iTunes. She searched through her music until she found a recording she had made herself years earlier under the name Theresa Riggi. The song was titled Angel. She pressed play, and the sound began to spread through the flat, slow, gentle, and heavy, like something meant for a church. Her 3 children were there with her. Austin and Luke were 8 years old, twins born minutes apart. Cecilia was 5. Her birthday was only 5 days away. She would have turned 6 that coming Sunday. As the song played, Theresa began what she had decided to do. It didn't happen all at once. It took time, strength, and determination. She stabbed each of her children 8 times, most of the wounds aimed at their chests. 8 wounds for Austin, 8 for Luke, 8 for Cecilia. Each stabbing done with a separate knife. Each attack carried out until there was nothing left moving, nothing left breathing. In that small flat, the song Angel continued to play as Theresa killed her children one after another. When it was over, she didn't leave the room in chaos. She arranged their bodies carefully on the bedroom floor. Austin was placed closest to the door, his head turned toward Cecilia. Cecilia was laid in the middle, facing Luke, and Luke was placed nearest to the balcony, his eyes toward his sister. Theresa adjusted Luke's arm so that it rested across Cecilia's body, as though he were still holding on to her, still protecting her even in death. Between Austin and Cecilia, she left a noticeable gap, not a random space, not a mistake, but a place she had set aside for herself, a space she intended to lie down in beside them. Hours passed. The children's bodies stayed where she had placed them, the room still except for the faint, lingering sound of the music that had never stopped playing. Blood had soaked deep into the floorboards, dark and thick around the 3 knives she had used, which now lay on the ground nearby, still covered with the children's blood. Theresa had done what she believed she had to do. And with her children gone, she turned her attention to the only thing left, ending her own life. Around 3 that afternoon, people living in the townhouses along Slateford Road started noticing the strong smell of gas. It was sharp and heavy in the air, strong enough that several of them grew alarmed and went to tell Derek Knight, the building manager. Knight came right away to check what was going on. As he approached the flat, he heard a dull explosion from inside, not loud enough to tear the building apart, but enough that smoke began to drift out through the balcony doors. He could see flickers of orange light from the first floor. Then he caught sight of Theresa. She was standing on the second-floor balcony, covered in blood. Her clothes were soaked all the way through, and her face was streaked red. She was screaming uncontrollably, while the crowd forming below stared up at her in shock. Knight didn't stop to think. He ran into the building, forced open the flat's door, and went inside. The moment he entered, he was hit by the thick smell of gas filling every room. Moved quickly, checking one space after another, looking for the source of the explosion, looking for anyone who might still be alive. When he opened the door to the bedroom, he stopped. Austin, Luke, and Cecilia were lying on the floor side by side, exactly as Theresa had left them. Their small bodies were completely still. Their clothes were drenched in blood that had stained the carpet dark around them. For a moment, Knight just stood there, frozen. He couldn't bring himself to get closer or touch them. He didn't need to. He could tell by looking that all 3 children were dead. Without saying a word, he stepped back out of the room. Outside, another neighbor, Jordan Cochrane, was watching Theresa still standing on the balcony. She was screaming and packing near the railing while people below shouted up to her, begging her not to do anything else. They called out, "Don't jump. Stay there. Help is coming." But she didn't listen. She climbed over the railing and launched herself off. She fell headfirst from the 2nd floor, crashing down toward the pavement. Cochrane lunged forward in a desperate attempt to catch her. He couldn't break her fall completely, but he managed to shift her midair just enough so that she struck the bonnet of a parked car instead of the concrete. The impact was violent. Her body hit the metal hard and folded over it. When emergency crews arrived minutes later, paramedics rushed directly to her. She was still alive, but in terrible shape. There were deep stab wounds across her neck, wrists, and stomach, all self-inflicted. One of her lungs had collapsed, and she had broken her left leg and left elbow. Sections of her hair were burnt from the blast. The team worked quickly, giving her oxygen, stopping the bleeding, and stabilizing her before rushing her to Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. Despite everything, her condition was described as serious but stable. Back inside the flat, police officers followed the same path Derek Knight had taken earlier. When they reached the bedroom, they found the children's bodies exactly as he had described. They confirmed what everyone already suspected. Austin, Luke, and Cecilia were dead. Each of them had been stabbed 8 times, with most of the wounds to the chest. 3 knives lay nearby on the floor, all of them stained with blood. The song Angel was still playing. Its soft melody looped endlessly through the room. Paramedics examined the children and concluded that they had been killed many hours earlier, long before the gas leak or explosion. Theresa had murdered them earlier that day, then stayed with their bodies for hours, arranging them carefully while preparing to end her own life. The explosion had been meant to erase everything, to take her life and destroy what she had done. But it hadn't worked. She had lived through it. And now police stood inside a flat filled with silence, a looping song, 3 dead children, and a mother who had planned to die with them, but survived instead. At Edinburgh Royal Infirmary, Theresa lay in her hospital bed under sedation, while detectives gathered outside her room, waiting for any chance to question her. They had 100 questions, but no way to ask them yet. Pasquale arrived at the hospital soon after devastated and broken. The police told him he was not a suspect. He had been helping from the very beginning, ever since he had reported the children missing. The next day, August 5th, the post-mortem results came in for Austin, Luke, and Cecilia. The findings matched what the investigators had already seen at the flat. Each child had been stabbed 8 times, with all wounds focused mainly on the chest. The blows were consistent and deliberate, carried out with precision. 3 knives had been used, 1 for each child, confirming that the killings had been planned and carried out in sequence. The cold repetition of 8 wounds each left no doubt in anyone's mind about the brutality and control behind what Theresa had done. When investigators went through the flat in detail, they found Theresa's laptop still open. The same song, Angel, was looping endlessly on iTunes. The account listed Tess Riggi as the artist, showing that she had recorded the song herself. It was her own voice that played during her children's final moments. The arrangement of the scene told them the rest. Cecilia had been placed in the center, Luke beside her, with his arms stretched over her body, and Austin on the other side. Between Austin and Cecilia, a clear space had been left, a space where Theresa had meant to lie down herself once the gas took hold. She had put everything in order for what she believed would be their shared death. The gas explosion was no accident. It had been her way of trying to erase what she had done, destroy any trace, and take her life along with theirs. But the explosion had been too weak to do the damage she intended. It burned the first floor and set off alarms, but it didn't kill her. Instead, she ended up alive, surrounded by everything she had tried to end. When Theresa woke up in the hospital, still in pain and covered in bandages, a chaplain came to see her. She cried uncontrollably, repeating that she didn't belong there. Through the sobs, she told him, "I want to be with my bobbies. I'm not meant to be here. I'm meant to be with my bobbies." She didn't express shock or sorrow for what she had done, only anguish that she had survived it. By August 6th, police had gathered enough evidence to formally charge her. A petition warrant was issued, and Theresa Riggi faced 3 counts of murder. Because her injuries were still healing, she couldn't yet travel or stand in a regular courtroom. So a judge authorized a special session inside the hospital itself. Part of Edinburgh Royal Infirmary was converted into a temporary courtroom, where Theresa, still under medical supervision, was brought in for her first court appearance. Not long after, Pasquale released a statement through Lothian and Borders Police. He said, "Our family is struggling to come to terms with the immense and tragic loss of 3 beautiful children. Thanks to all who have offered such great comfort and support. We request that the media respect our privacy at this difficult time." The entire country reeled from the case. A mother who had crossed an ocean and fought to keep her children from their father had ended up killing them instead. It was unthinkable. 3 young lives gone, their only crime being that their mother couldn't bear to share them. The investigation left nothing in doubt. The evidence was complete, and now the legal process was all that remained. In the months that followed her arrest, Theresa remained under constant medical supervision while teams of psychiatrists examined her. They spent weeks assessing her mental state, running tests, and reviewing her behavior leading up to the killings. Their final reports concluded that she suffered from several personality disorders, narcissistic, paranoid, and histrionic among them. They said that in the days surrounding the murders, she had been under such extreme psychological stress that she had lost her grip on reality and was not fully aware of what she was doing when she killed her children. On March 7th, 2011, she was brought before the High Court in Edinburgh to enter her plea. She appeared in court wearing a white suit, looking visibly fragile, and cried out loud throughout most of the hearing. Her lawyer, Donald Finlay QC, one of the country's most well-known defense advocates, spoke on her behalf. Finlay entered pleas of guilty to 3 counts of culpable homicide, saying Theresa had acted under diminished responsibility. The original charges for murder were reduced as a direct result of the psychiatric assessments that found her severely unwell. During the hearing, Finlay told the court that this was the most tragic and difficult case that I have ever had to deal with in over 35 years in these courts. Prosecutor Alex Prentice QC then stood and presented the agreed statement of facts. He spoke clearly and carefully, laying out what had taken place. He explained how, from the very beginning, Theresa had been intensely possessive over her children. She believed that no one else, not even their father, was capable of protecting them. She kept them isolated almost completely, schooling them at home and rarely letting them out of her sight. When they did leave the house, they wore electronic locators that allowed her to track where they were at all times. She had given each child a mobile phone that could only call her number, and she told them to use it immediately if their father did or said anything they didn't like. She monitored their lives down to the smallest detail. The prosecution brought up the testimony of Dr. Brenda Robson, a child psychologist who had studied the family's history. Dr. Robson said the children had been conditioned to fear their father and viewed the world outside their home as full of danger. They had grown up believing their mother was the only person who could keep them safe. Things had escalated sharply once Pasquale introduced the children to his new partner, Michelle Ross. He had told them she was Daddy's friend, but Theresa saw it as the ultimate betrayal. From that point, her paranoia grew stronger. She became convinced that Pasquale and the courts were working together to strip her of the children permanently. In her mind, everyone had turned against her, and she believed there was only one thing left she could control. Prentice recounted the phone call on the night of August 2nd. Theresa had asked Pasquale again and again if he planned to take the children from her. Tired after years of fighting, he told her that she had left him no choice. She paused and then said, "Say goodbye then," before ending the call. 48 hours later, she killed all 3 children. The court listened silently as the prosecutor described how it had happened. 3 separate knives. Each child stabbed 8 times, most wounds to the chest. the song Angel playing in the background, their small bodies laid side by side, with Luke's arm draped protectively across Cecilia, and a clear space left between them and where Theresa intended to lie herself. Prentice told the court that space was not there by accident. It was deliberately put there by Theresa Riggi because that was the place where, in death, she wanted to be with her children. Finlay then spoke for the defense. He told the court that Theresa had truly believed her husband was a danger to their children, though prosecutors rejected that as false. He argued that she had been overwhelmed by the combination of stress, fear, and mental illness. He said Theresa's love for her children had been real, but profoundly disordered, so possessive and distorted that it ultimately destroyed them all. The judges accepted the plea to culpable homicide. Sentencing would take place the following month. Pasquale sat quietly throughout, wearing a ribbon on his lapel made from 3 colors, one for each of his children's favorites, and watched the woman he had once built a life with admit in open court that she had killed Austin, Luke, and Cecilia. On April 27, 2011, Theresa Riggi was brought to the High Court in Glasgow to hear her sentence. Lord Brackadale was the judge presiding over the case. In the courtroom, Pasquale Riggi sat quietly beside his partner Michelle Ross, the same ribbon pinned to his jacket in the favorite colors of his 3 children. When the hearing began, Lord Brackadale looked directly at Theresa as he spoke. He reminded her that she had admitted to stabbing to death each of her 2 sons, Austin and Luke, who were 8, and her daughter Cecilia, who was 5. He said the result was a devastating tragedy, a loss that had destroyed an entire family. Pasquale and their relatives, he said, had been left utterly bereft by the deaths of the children. He paused for a moment before going on, describing what the evidence had shown. The number and type of stab wounds on each child revealed a level of violence that was extreme and sustained. The judge said that what Theresa had done must have taken a great deal of time and effort, that it was hard even to imagine the physical act of carrying it out. Lord Brackadale acknowledged the psychiatric findings that had been presented by Dr. Crichton. The doctor had testified that Theresa suffered from several personality disorders. Yet he said even those conditions could not fully explain the sheer brutality of what had been done. The acts went beyond what her illness could justify. After a long pause, Lord Brackadale said, "It is clear that any degree of responsibility for such ghastly and grotesque acts must be visited with a lengthy sentence of imprisonment." He told her that her love for her children had once been real, but it had become something twisted, a love that turned into control, control that turned into obsession, and obsession that finally ended in murder. She had killed them rather than face losing them. When he finished, Lord Brackadale sentenced Theresa Riggi to 16 years in prison. The guilty plea to culpable homicide meant she avoided a mandatory life sentence for murder, but 16 years still reflected the gravity of what she had done. Without the finding of diminished responsibility, her punishment would have been even harsher. After the judgment, Pasquale went outside the courthouse and read a prepared statement to reporters. His voice was heavy but steady as he spoke. He said, "I will never forget Austin, Luke, and Cecilia. They left everlasting impressions on me. They were such wonderful, energetic, bright, and happy children. The horrific manner in which my children died will leave an indelible mark on the rest of my life. It pains me to the core that I was unable to protect them from the selfish, brutal, and murderous acts that ended their lives so unfairly. There is no justification for this heinous crime, repeated 3 times, nor is there any sentence that can provide justice for the overwhelming loss of 3 lives. Theresa was taken from the courtroom soon after and transferred to Cornton Vale Prison in Stirling, Scotland's only prison for women. She would serve her sentence there, but not among others. The details of her case spread quickly, and the other inmates wanted nothing to do with her. She was kept mostly isolated, and even then, the hostility followed her. Later that same year, in November 2011, another prisoner attacked her inside her cell and slashed her face with a razor blade, leaving her badly disfigured. Theresa was moved from the prison to the Royal Edinburgh Hospital to receive treatment for her injuries before being transferred to Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottinghamshire, a high-security psychiatric institution in England. Nearly 3 years passed. On March 10th, 2014, staff at Rampton found Theresa dead in her room during the early hours of the morning. Police were called just after 2, but her death was not considered suspicious. She had managed to do what she had failed to do back in Edinburgh. She ended her life. At 50 years old, Theresa Riggi was gone, leaving behind the same silence she had tried to create years earlier when she took the lives of her children.